any place that was, like who's going to be the leader, the capital of the Southeast. And when I was in high school, I guess junior high and high school, Nashville was one of the contenders. It was Nashville, Birmingham, and Atlanta. And nobody knew, which way it was going to go. There was going to be some kind of capital with a hub and so forth. And so Atlanta built the big international airport, and the game was over. It was Atlanta. So at that point, sort of Nashville and Birmingham kind of, sunk into a little abyss there, while Atlanta grew, and a lot of companies and so forth that, had picked Nashville, migrated to Atlanta. And Atlanta really, the airport really exploded the Atlanta development. And I really think that's part of why Nashville is so great right now. That it didn't have that spontaneous growth that Atlanta had, that Atlanta couldn't keep up with, really. It grew internally and for some reason became a very appealing place to live, other than the obvious thing is the climate is great, transportation is great, it's no taxes. I mean, there are lots of things that, would sell Nashville. But why Nashville instead of Knoxville or Chattanooga or some of that? And they've seen their growth too. Not really sure why Nashville, but wow, it's just grown in just the right ways. Great restaurants, great entertainment, great venues, young population. What they've done with the streets and the bridges and all that infrastructure has been fantastic. I hope that they don't have more flooding problems, because that's that downtown flooding is a pain in the butt. But the city has been, wow, what a success story. I mean, I can only guess that there must have been fabulous leadership in Nashville or maybe in Tennessee over that time. And when I say that time, I'm talking about the last maybe 30 years, maybe 30 or 40 years. It's been this steady climb for Nashville. And but everything about it, even country music. When I was a kid, they called it country and western, and it was country and western music kind of jumbled in together. And you had Roy Rogers, and you had all these western singers, Gene Autry, and all kind. The western and country was just kind of one genre, and then the country music kind of split off, and then the country music kind of put its tentacles into pop music, and then and country and pop were kind of together, and then it's just interesting how that occurred. But it's not just the music industry. That's cool, and glad that happened. But yeah, Nashville just generally, I think even exclusive of the music industry, Nashville would be very successful. And of course, they made various strides with a professional football team, all kinds of things that sort of brought Nashville to that next level.
Yeah, it's really cool. So speaking of music, did you feel when you were growing up like Nashville was a music town? And what was your favorite concert you've ever been to?
Let's see. All right. I didn't really think Nashville was much of a music town. when I grew up, there's an area near where we lived that was called Music Row. And I had driven down Music Row many times, and it was just houses. There were no buildings. They were houses that had been converted into recording studios. And they were big old houses. And the reason, I guess, the reason that developed was just because these houses were big and old, and that, people could, set up their instruments and, play music in these big old houses. And they weren't very expensive, they were past their prime, but big. And so I think, in fact, when you drove along Music Row, there'd be like one of those, looked like a realtor sign or something hanging out. It would say, RCA or, whatever the recording studios were. They were old. And over time, of course, with the popularity of country music, they tore down those houses, I guess, and built real recording studios there, I don't know what you need to build a recording studio, but anyway, they built bigger buildings, and so that's great. But I didn't really think much of, they didn't have all the sculpture, they didn't have the Country Music Hall of Fame, they didn't have, none of that stuff existed. So it was just sort of a side thing, and we never listened to country music. That wasn't it. We did listen to, Elvis Presley. We did listen to, I guess the whole Motown sound was the biggest thing at that time. But I don't think any of us, not at MBA or my friends or whatever, ever listened to country music. And I think it was a much more narrowly focused, music at that time. It wasn't, it wasn't pop. It wasn't the kind of thing that you would hear on the radio very often. There might be a country music station. And of course, Nashville didn't have that, but it wasn't in common. You would never be walking through Macy's and hear country music on the, that was just, it was just this little sub part of the music industry. It was very small, but yeah, no longer. It's big.
So what's your favorite concert you've ever been to?
Yeah, you asked that just earlier, and it was 1970. I think it was 1970, and it was either. Yeah, I think it was 1970. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Yeah, they were awesome. Yeah. So, yeah, that was it.
We'll go stop there. So Nashville's also developed a pretty robust culinary scene. Where did you first come to love food, and how did you get into cooking? You're a master of the grill now. How did that all come about for you?
Yeah, that was, again, that's kind of a product of the time. At the time that I was in high school, in junior high, grade school, Nashville did not have liquor by the drink. They didn't have liquor by the drink. And because we didn't have liquor by the drink, you couldn't order a cocktail in a restaurant. And if you know anything about the restaurant industry, you know that a fine dining restaurant needs liquor sales. That's where they make a lot of money. In the restaurant business generally, what they refer to as food cost is somewhere around 30 to 33%, somewhere around that for food cost. So it doesn't matter if you're eating a hamburger at Wendy's or if you're eating an $80 meal at at a fine restaurant. The actual cost of the food on your plate is about 30% or a third, roughly, of your bill. But cocktails are different, and their markup is much higher. So, you may be looking at a food cost in cocktails of, 8%, 10%. That's just the amount of the little lemon juice that goes in there and the little shot of whatever and, your sparkling soda or something that goes in there. So your food, the actual food cost is only about, it's much lower. So in order to make a good white tablecloth restaurant survive, you need sales of alcoholic beverages. And we didn't have that, so we didn't have nice restaurants. And there was a restaurant that my dad, my mom and dad were both kind of into dining. You can't live in Europe for that long without, having been exposed to some wonderful cuisine. And they were. And so there was a place in those days, we had motels. And a motel generally would have, like a strip of rooms in a motel. And then you'd have a swimming pool in front of it. Usually you had a strip of rooms, swimming pool in front of it, and then you would have a little restaurant that was separate. And the restaurant would serve mainly breakfast and dinner. So if you were going out and doing something, you could breakfast there, dinner when you came home. But these were all independent. This was before Holiday Inn was big or any of the franchises came. And there was a restaurant that was outside of Nashville. There was a little motel, and it was owned by a Mexican family. And once a week, and I can't remember when, we'll have to ask Ginger, I think it was like Thursday nights or something like that, when it was like a slow night, they would serve Mexican food. And they would cook up Mexican food, and you could come in and have Mexican food. So we went there. We would go there, and of course, 90% of the people there were Mexican. They had come for the Mexican food. But, so that was fun. It was the only way you could get Mexican food in Nashville at the time. So yeah, that was a good thing. And then we also had there was Air Base in Smyrna, and a lot of the airmen at the air base had married women from Southeast Asia. They'd married women from, Japan or Indonesia or, whatever. And so those wives got together and formed a restaurant that they called the Omni Hut. And the Omni Hut served, I think they referred to it as Polynesian food, but it was basically, it was a kind of Southeast Asian cuisine, but a lot of sweet and sour. And so we would go to the Omni Hut. That was a different taste. So it was the Omni Hut. There was this little Mexican restaurant, which I can't remember the name of. And then there was another one farther out that was called Rosa's Cantina. And we went to Rosa's Cantina after some sort of country song. Anyway, it was Rosa's Cantina, and we would go there and have Mexican food. So that was, we went to that Italian restaurant as well. So there was the Omni Hut, the Polynesian restaurant, and then there was the Italian restaurant, which was not very, and then there were the two Mexican restaurants, Rosa's Cantina, and then this other one that I can't remember, but the restaurant part of the, of the motel. And that was about it, and we would try to, circulate through those, but we didn't have much in terms of choice for restaurants. And besides, Nashville was smaller in those days, so there weren't a lot of restaurants. When I was in college, this was interesting. When I was in college, Nashville, and this would have been about 1969 or 70, maybe. Nashville, it finally got to the vote, liquor by the drink. And it used to be like a third rail issue. Nobody wants to introduce that, you get voted out kind of thing. But anyway, it was it finally came up. And I remember I was at home over that summer, and there were, lots of man on the street kind of interviews. Oh, what do you think about, I'll die before I'll let liquor by the drink come into, the devil's behind, all that kind of stuff. And trying to find someone who would speak for liquor by the drink was like impossible. I mean, nobody, there were no restaurants encouraging it because no restaurants had liquor. So, they had a tough time finding anybody who would say it was a good idea. I mean, everybody was against it. And all the projection, all the preachers, and all that. I mean, all the projection, what liquor by the drink will never pass in Nashville. I mean, it'll be 100 years before liquor by the drink will pass in Nashville. Nobody's for it. And everybody said that privately, that's never gonna, And they got into that voting booth and closed that little curtain behind them. And liquor by the drink passed overwhelmingly in Nashville. And the rest is history. A good restaurant could actually justify, to actually bring up a plan to a bank that made sense. And they would get the money and they would build restaurants, and, Nashville is now kind of a culinary wonderland. I mean, you've got all kinds of great restaurants, but that's all because of liquor by the drink. In Green Hills, we had this was an interesting thing. I'm sure this was politicians at their best. But in Green Hills, we had a steak restaurant that was called Nero's Cactus Canyon. And Nero's, at the time, it was kind of in a backwater area of Green Hills off the, Hillsborough Road. Nero's was there. And they were a steak restaurant. And of course, this was before liquor by the drink passed, and you couldn't order a drink at Nero's. But they had a separate building that you would walk through. It was like the restaurant was here and it had an entrance, and then there was a separate building that had an entrance and exit. You would walk through this building to get to Nero's. And this was a liquor store. And they only sold liquor by the pint. They didn't sell fifths or big bottles. They only sold liquor by the pint. And the idea was you would walk through this and you'd pick up a pint of, whatever you wanted. You would take it into Nero's. And in Nero's, you could buy what they referred to as a setup. So you could say, I want a Coca-Cola setup. And it would be a tall glass with ice and Coca-Cola and about that much space at the top. And then you'd reach in and pull out your pint of, rum or something. pour it in there and put it back away, stir it up, and that was so you could have. So that anyway, that was in Green Hills. I doubt that there's Nero's Cactus Canyon anymore in Green Hills, but that was, and they had like these old wagon wheels, stuff like that was out there. It was supposed to give you a Western feel, a Western vibe, and it seemed to me the steaks were really good. And they had a cornbread that was like round, well, it looked like a little flying saucer. I don't know how they made it, but it was like a fried cornbread, and I think they called it Silver Dollar.
When undertaking something as financially large and important as retirement, how did you approach it? Did you budget for yourself? Did you pay a financial advisor? How do you know when you have enough?
All right, so those are a lot of different questions. The number one is you save, and you do it early, really early. It's really important to do that. So, you should be moving toward that, moving toward being on track, very early in your career. By the time you hit 30, you ought to have at least 1 year of your current salary. So if you're making $100,000 a year, by the time you hit 30, you ought to have $100,000 in your, in your account, in your investment account. If you want to use advisors, there are. Here's what I'll tell you about that. Frequently, they call them financial advisors, retirement advisors. They call them financial planners, and sometimes they call them money managers. And the thing to keep absolutely crystal clear in your mind is there's only one money manager, and that's you. You can't hire a money manager. You can hire advisors. Advisors are great. I am delighted to give anyone advice, but the thing about advice is you can take it or leave it or manipulate it or whatever. That's what those guys do, and that's wonderful. Love to have lots of advice, which I can take or leave, but there's only one money manager, and you're it. You're it for you. So you better know what you're doing. And of course, like anything else in life, you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to do well on some things, do poorly in others, make this progress. To me, your planning for retirement is inextricably linked to your own net worth. As I've told my kids, imagine this scenario: two brothers, same age, and one of them has $500,000 in retirement savings in 401ks and IRAs and whatever, and the other one has zero in retirement savings, no 401ks, no IRAs, nothing that is tax advantaged. Which one is more ready for retirement? And of course, the tempting answer is, the guy who's got $500,000 in retirement savings, he's much more prepared for retirement. The answer is you don't have enough information, because the guy who has $500,000 in retirement savings is also has a $500,000 negative net worth. He owes a lot of money. And the other guy, the guy who has nothing at all in retirement savings, he's got a $5 million net worth. Well, he is far better prepared to retire. Don't focus just on your IRA or your Roth or your 401k or whatever, you've sectioned off for retirement. You've got to look at the full picture. You've got to look at your net worth. And that's what you have to be focusing on all the time. In terms of how much is enough, well, that depends on, how you want to live and when you want to retire. If you are like a lot of folks and you wait until, you're in your 60s to retire, you're not going to need as much for retirement as someone who wants to retire at 45, obviously. So that's just going to be up to you and what you want to do in retirement. You want to travel, you're okay living out in the woods, chopping your own firewood. So that's that's kind of your decision. But do look at it holistically and do appreciate that you can't, you can give all of your bug control to the bug guy. You can give all of your automobile maintenance to, an automotive specialist. You can, fine, great. But you can't do that with your net worth. You're the guy who has to run that.
All right, so what do you think about Bitcoin and other electronic payments?
Yeah. Well, Bitcoin is interesting. And, I used to think that it's not worth anything. Now I think that it's not worth much. But, it does have some value. And I think, in the future there will be, there'll be more of an established market for it. I think right now, you can't short it. It's not it doesn't offer the financial flexibility of other investments. But the question is it really an investment? I'm not sure it's an investment, so I'm not sure how everybody is treating it, whether it's thinking of it as an investment. But I think there's a real future for it, and I think it's going to have legs. I think it's going to be around.
What does gift giving mean to you, and how did you get so good at it? Is it something you consciously have tried to pass on to your kids?
It really isn't something I've tried to consciously pass on to my kids. I have I guess that's sort of one of those pet peeve things. In terms of gift giving, most people, I guess this is a social thing, we're set up to give. We are set up to gift. The two big ones for us are the religious holiday, Christmas, and, the birthday. And these almost require some sort of gift, and so you've got to, it's so-and-so's birthday, I got to give them a gift, or it's my wife's birthday, I got to come up with a gift. And so or my best friend having a birthday, and they're actually things. You can go to a store, a whole store that's a gift store, and you can even see, a little table. You can go to Office Depot, and they'll have at Christmas they'll have a table set up for gifts. Gifts. But for me, I think of those things, they might as well substitute for gift. They might as well substitute junk. These are just junk. They're things that nobody ever wants, nobody ever needs. They're just things that so that I can go through the motion of giving you a thing that you will open and then be able to say, thank you for my gift, of the, golfer made out of bolts and nuts or something. It's like the kind of thing nobody would ever want. And so it's a gift. It's not, nobody would ever go and buy that for themselves. It's just the kind of thing that you just gift, so you can say that you gave a gift and so that they can feel like they received a gift. But I think it's much better if you actually see something or think of something that's a real thing and you say, oh my gosh, you know what? I have this thing, or I can buy this thing, or I see this thing that would be perfect for Julie. I think Julie would really like this. And then just gift it to her. That's great. I mean, I hate being forced into gifting. I hate, they're having this occasion, you have to buy a gift. Okay, you wind up going to the store and just getting a gift. But I think it's so much fun when you come up with something, and frequently people will pass that by. They'll just say, oh, that would be perfect for Russell, but it's not his birthday. And Anita goes, oh, I'll just, and so they just pass it by. That's a missed opportunity. I mean, if it was really perfect for Russell, why don't you give it to Russell? That's a, and actually, to be honest, I've never known anyone who, I don't think I've ever known anyone who's done that before, but it's just something that I think there are many missed opportunities in gifting, and I think there are many forced gifts that you just, oh, Aunt Tilly's coming, get out the so-and-so and put it on the coffee table so that she can see that, and it's just junk. And most of those things that they call gifts that are in or anything that's in a gift store is junk. It's just pure crap that nobody needs and nobody wants. And nobody would go into that store and say, oh, here's this one thing that I'd like to have, in my home. Nobody says that. They're always like, let me give that to somebody. So that's how I think about gifts. I don't want to miss that opportunity to give someone a gift that is cool, and you think, I know that person would appreciate that, Let me give them that gift. That's, it's just a good thing. So I think that's good.
Yeah. So final question. What advice would you give either somebody like me at age 30, James at age 32, or even yourself, if you could go back in time to give yourself advice to someone who's 30 and looking toward their future and wanting to be successful and happy? What advice would you give?
Well, yeah, I think we talked about something similar earlier on. I think I would say, be more open. Don't have such a rigid plan. I don't think you need such a rigid plan. Sometimes things present themselves and you're like, yeah. No, I think to miss an opportunity is a terrible thing, and so whatever the thing is, I think it's great to be able to capitalize on opportunities that are presented to you, even when they might not fit into your short-term plans. Like, I wasn't really thinking about going to Charlotte. That was like, that never occurred to me. I'm not really sure I want to go to Charlotte. I mean, that's a new place. Not sure. And there are lots of people who miss great opportunities because that wasn't in the plan. And then suddenly it presents itself, and they're like, no, it wasn't in the plan.
What, if any, historical moments, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, landing on the moon, the Berlin Wall, 9/11, etc., do you remember in a larger sense? Ones that stuck with you or noticeably changed your life day to day?
Okay. So my response to some of these historical events. The first one I really remember was the shooting of JFK in Dallas. And that was, I think I was in the 8th grade, I believe, at MBA. And some upperclassman had had a car that was parked up there, and it was a convertible. And he had the convertible down, and he had the radio turned up. It was the only way that we could, listen. And there were a bunch of kids around that radio and that convertible. And I remember, I think it was Walter Cronkite. Anyway, the announcer was giving sort of a status and an update. And there's been an event, and the president's been shot. The president has died, and it was that really affected. I think affected all of us. Presidents have been shot in the past, but none of us knew about it. Other than the history books. So it was pretty shocking. So I remember that. Just a kid, I remember that. Did it change my life? Not really. I don't think it changed my life, but it was a shocking event. The Cuban Missile Crisis and the Cold War did affect my life. My dad was actually building a house on Eastland Avenue in East Nashville, and one of the things he put in the house was a fallout shelter. That was something that the house had. And then later when he built the house on Hillsborough Road, that house had a fallout shelter. And he had, because of course the Soviet threat lasted past the Cuban Missile Crisis. But he not only had the fallout shelter, which was it was essentially a Brico block, room, which did have some sort of a metal roof over it and concrete. And everybody knew that it obviously wouldn't do anything against a nuclear blast, but the fallout that might have drifted down would be, you'd be protected from the fallout. And I guess the scary part was that he furnished it. I remember we had these tubular aluminum cots, there were cots. The first one I think had 4 cots, and then the next one had 6. There were cots, and there was like a cabinet with some canned food and some things like that. And then they were near the water heater, and the idea was you could run a hose from the water heater and have a tank of water that you could drink. And I remember really thinking about that, what would that be like? I guess Mom would sleep there, and Dad would sleep. We would sleep here. And it was a room smaller than this little area that we have here. I mean, it was maybe 8 by 10, something like that, maybe. Very small. And the idea was a couple of flashlights, of course it'd be dark all the time. No windows, obviously. About how difficult that would be, if we were, we had to go into the fallout shelter. And then I thought past that, and I thought, and then what would we do? I mean, after the fallout, after the whatever it was, 2 weeks or 3 weeks or wherever we're supposed to be in there, what would we do? We'd come out and what would we find? I mean, the house would be, even if it was still standing, the house would be ruined and, be fallout everywhere and dust and, I don't know, sort of post-apocalyptic vision of what that would be like. And I asked my dad, when I came back to the States, that was one of the things, my house had a basement, but it didn't have a fallout shelter. I asked my dad, what did you think about that? I mean, building a house and building a fallout shelter and having did you think about, like what it would be like to live in there and what it would be like after you, and he said, no, never really thought about that. It was something that was done at the time. You had, houses that were built at that time period had, it was a good idea to have a fallout shelter, and we had one. But he said, the truth is, I didn't overthink it. And I think that's really good. I mean, I'm glad that he didn't overthink it. I was thinking about it and I was wondering about it, but he was like, we'll just have to cross that bridge when we come to it, if we ever do. Historic events. Of course, I remember 9/11. We had, at the time, I was with an energy trading company, and I was doing business continuity planning. And of course, when 9/11 happened, we were all concerned that there would be some repercussion in the energy trading business. That there might be some explosion or something. That never happened. But I was concerned about that. And of course, then, all of our lives were changed with the Afghan war and all that. So, yeah. But that's about it.
So, you had spoken about when you were going to get the polio vaccine and there were lines around the block.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the COVID vaccine and those who are reluctant to take it?
I mean, I'm sure that there were those who were reluctant to take the polio vaccine. They certainly got no press. But I think all of this, relates to, I was absolutely wrong about this. This is I thought that with the dawn of the internet, I was like, I don't know, 40, when the internet really came to pass. And I said, this is amazing, this is great, because this will mean the end of all of those crazy conspiracy theories. Because people will be able to look up stuff that, they can't look up now. And we used to have the World Book Encyclopedia. And, if you want to look stuff up, that was, but debunking conspiracy theories, things like that, you couldn't do. I mean, there was no place to look that up unless you wanted to read some books or something, go to the library. But I thought the internet's going to be great. There won't be any conspiracy theories after this. You'll be able to find facts. And of course, obviously I was dead wrong. There are far more conspiracy theories now than there were then. And So in terms of, where did we start with this thing?
About people who are reluctant.
Oh yeah, the vaccine. Yeah, but I think there are a lot of conspiracy theories, and I think just like all this crazy stuff with the, these political followers who are, sort of baseless stuff, they just decide because their leader says do or don't or whatever that they will or won't. I do think now, well, I know now that there's a lot more data coming out, about the danger of some of these vaccines, especially the RNA vaccines. And I have had a little bit of, personal experience with that. So I think that's kind of interesting. But I'm completely vaccinated. Charlotte is, all the kids are, and all that. So that's good, I think. Because I think we've dodged, we've dodged a bullet. I'm glad that, we were vaccinated. But, now as I'm seeing, there are some complications from the vaccine. And there are some people, a small subset, who are suffering some of those complications. Knowing what I know now, though, I would still get the vaccine. There's a risk in all of these things. You just have to accept the risk and move on. One of the things that in business continuity is a major concept, one that you have to really think about, is risk, severity, and frequency. So, is there risk? What's the severity of it? And then what's the frequency? So, for example, everything in life is a risk. You drive to work in the morning, is a risk. There's a risk you're going to die. There's a risk somebody's going to run into your car, you're going to die. So you have to weigh the risk versus the severity, what is the worst case scenario, and then the frequency, how often does that happen? And then what you try to do is mitigate it. You try to mitigate it as best you can. In the case of driving to work in the morning, you have a big safe car, drive conservatively, wear your seatbelt. You mitigate the risk as much as you can. But the truth is the severity can be very high. Fortunately, the frequency is pretty low. And so you come up with a solution and you say, yeah, I'll drive to work in the morning. That may sound like a silly example, but everything you're doing, you're constantly, this is why it pays to be able to think, but you're constantly should be weighing those things. You're never going to have a circumstance, very few circumstances, where you're going to have no risk, low severity, and almost no frequency. If you did, then that would be like no-brainer, no-brainer, I'll do that. And then you've got these other things that have a very high risk, very high severity, like death, and then pretty high frequency. And, those can be things like flying in a private airplane, that's as opposed to flying a commercial airplane, which has less risk. Severity is the same, but the frequency is lower. So, in terms of the vaccine, yeah, there definitely, no question, there's some risk in taking that vaccine. Definitely is. But in terms of the severity, certainly, of not taking it, and the frequency. I think you're well off to take it. At least that's how I analyzed it.
So you spoke about the dawn of the internet and, how we have cancel culture today. How do you feel about social justice and religious movements? Was race ever a discussion while you were growing up? And where do you think the social direction of the world was headed?
In our family, my mom, my dad, we never had, at least to my knowledge, any qualm about any of that. We had my dad, of course, growing up, he had lots of Hispanic friends. My grandfather was Jewish, or at least was raised Jewish. We had affiliations and associations with, as much as possible, with Black Americans. But the truth is, the first Black American who was my peer, I did not meet until I was in college. I knew plenty of Black Americans. We had a Black guy that mowed the grass and a Black maid, but they were, different social class. And when my mom and dad had their bridge club or whatever, they were all white folks. But they never, at least to me, never exhibited any problem with, Blacks or Hispanics or Asians or anything else. They were fine with that. And maybe that's because their minds were opened a little bit living overseas. That might be the case. But I hope that the world heads more in that direction, of course. I don't know for sure that it is. I think this business, the cancel culture and the Black Lives Matter and all that kind of stuff, it obviously you're trying to make progress. Black Lives Matter, yeah, okay, I get that. But when this winds up being, when it winds up in riots and looting and all this kind of stuff, I think the divide widens, and I think, what progress has been made, tends to recede. So I'm hoping that we're able to make more progress, both in the U.S. and, internationally. I have more faith internationally than I do in the U.S. I think in a lot of there are certainly isolated cultures. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some really isolated cultures that, but I think generally, internationally, folks are forced to get along better. And I saw that, in my international experience. A lot of mutual respect for whatever the religion was or the belief was, and I found more respect for my beliefs and my religion and so forth than, frankly, I deserved. They were very generous, respecting my own. I remember being on a job site, and somebody had gone into town and gotten the food for for everybody at the job site. And we were out there, and they had everything came in a banana leaf. They did a banana leaf, it was folded over and so forth. And, so I was talking to somebody or doing something, and I hadn't opened, and I noticed nobody nobody had opened their banana leaves. Nobody was starting to eat. And I was like, what's wrong? And the guy who was beside me said, Mr. Jack, they're waiting for you to pray. And because they all knew I was a Christian and I was supposed to pray before meals. I was like, oh, yeah, let me pray. Okay, now we can eat. They had such just honor and respect. Hopefully we see that more and more.
So you just mentioned how J.E.J. was Jewish and kind of hid being Jewish. How did Papa feel about that, and how do you feel about that?
Well, he really wasn't Jewish. He was raised Jewish. But I think that he moved away from that. Yeah, of course, you know the story. He came over, I think, at age 2 or 3 from Eastern Europe. And he was an Eastern European Jew, and his family was Eastern European Jewish. And in the used furniture business, they were in Connecticut. They were near Yale. And I always imagined that a lot of Yale students would come and buy used furniture to outfit their dorm rooms or whatever, and then sell it back to them later, But I think that while his family was Jewish, and I'm guessing attended synagogue and all of that, I don't really know. But when J.E.J. He graduated from Yale, had a medical degree. That was back in the days when you didn't, the medicine was like a trade school. So you didn't go to college and then med school. You just went to med school. And so he did, and he went to Yale, went to med school, worked in a sanatorium. They were big at the time, tuberculosis sanatorium, and he contracted TB. And he was actually working in a sanatorium. That's another story I'll tell you later. But anyway, he contracted TB. And at the time, the only thing they had, was to isolate in a sanatorium. And then they said, they called it consumption. We call it tuberculosis. They called it consumption. And it was to go out west. That was the prescription, go out west. That somehow the dry climate and, dry air would benefit you, and these fissures and holes in the lung would, help to close. And, you might, he was a young man in his 20s, and he basically went to New Mexico to die. I mean, there was not a great success rate, but that's what he did, and he left his family behind. He left everything he knew behind, which was in the Northeast, and went out to New Mexico and incredibly survived and lived a long life and lived to be an old man. And but I think he recognized early on in this new, he went to, I think New Mexico was still a territory when he went out there. I don't think it was a state. But he knew that being Jewish was going to be limiting to him. There were a lot of organizations he couldn't join, a lot of things, a lot of segregation, from his culture, and he was like, you know what, I'm not doing that. I'm just not doing that. I'm going to have, I'm going to do everything I can do. And he crammed in a lot of stuff in, a very short time. I don't know if you remember, he was a wing walker He was a wing walker in the old Jennies in barnstorming, days. He loved the airplane, not the dawn of flight, but it was, early on. And so he, he wanted to do all that stuff, and felt like he couldn't if he was, Jewish and isolated in that way. And in fact, he was in the shrine. He was a Shriner, and that's the kind of thing you couldn't have done if you were Jewish. So he made up a lot of stuff. He even made up where he was born. I mean, he made up his name. He decided he added on the. I think the Joseph, maybe it was the Jackson. Anyway, he just made it up. And he made up his wife's name. Did you know that he made up his wife? Yeah. His wife was Agnes Phallus. That was her name, Agnes Phallus. And he decided he didn't like Agnes and he didn't like Phallus. And so he called her Alice. He always liked the name Alice. So he called her Alice. And then that wasn't good because then it was Alice Phallus. And so he didn't like that. So he decided that she was of French extraction and that her real name was De La Follette. So that's how Agnes Phallus became Alice De La Follette. And that was on her driver's license. And so he just made it up, and that's what she was. And so anyway, I think he just decided that being Jewish was limiting, and besides that, he kind of felt like it was full of shit anyway. So he, when he died, he had no religious affiliation, and he told Alice, I don't want to have a service or anything like that. Just, bury me, that's fine. Back in those days, everybody's buried, so just bury me, that's fine. Well, there were so many people who were asking about, when the service was going to be, and they wanted to attend the service. He was a doctor, and he had all kinds of patients all over Albuquerque. And so my dad was there, and Alice said, I know he said he didn't want to have a service, but I think we should have a service. And so my dad said, okay, I'll see what I can do. And it turned out that my dad went to high school with a guy who was a, deacon or, something up in the Episcopal Church. And so he asked him if he would do a service for my grandfather, whom he did not know and who was obviously not an Episcopalian. But he was like, sure, that's what you want, do a service. And so he had a service at the Episcopal Church, and, people attended from all over, from all over Albuquerque, and it was a big service, and J.E.J. would have probably rolled over in his grave if he'd known about that. But anyway, so that was an Episcopalian deacon, or I don't know, whatever above a preacher, did a service for him. And then he was buried, and my grandmother, Alice, decided that he didn't have a good enough view. So they dug him up, and they moved him to another spot in the cemetery that had a better view.
Sorry, we were right at there.
Well, anyway, like I was saying, she didn't. There were two things she didn't like. She thought he was too close to other, burial plots, and he never liked that. He didn't like to be, hemmed in. Plus, he didn't have a good view, and so they dug him up and they found another place that had a better view and nobody, near him. So that's where he was. That's where he now lies in Albuquerque. What else? So
earlier we spoke on abortion and the sanctity of human life.
Mm-hmm.
Do your feelings change at all when addressing the death penalty?
Well, the truth is, the way the death penalty is handled in America, I think we should do away with it. And the reason is simply that it's just, all of this just takes too long. There are too many appeals and it's too expensive. And I think if we just, I think it's sad that you're warehousing people for such a long time, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you're warehousing human beings, which I think is terrible. But we no longer have, the ability to carry out a death sentence. And so, hampered as we are by the courts and the system, I think it's just better to just assign a life sentence and, life sentence without parole, and that's, that's it. I think it's kind of sad. And I think actually some of the guys who are sentenced to life without parole would probably rather be executed. I don't know. You'd have to ask them about that.
Does the decline in organized religion concern you at all? Do people need the promise of everlasting life to drive their morality and goodness? And is there an importance in a community that grows around places of worship?
Well, that's a lot of questions. I think religion serves a great purpose, and again, that's one of those things where everybody thinks they're right, lucky me that I just happened to be born into the right religion. That's fortunate for you that, that you were born into the right religion. But I do think that these mores that are established by religion are then enforced by parents and generationally passed on, and I think that's a great thing. And do we really need it? Well, I hope we don't, because we're becoming increasingly a more atheistic society. Generally, the mores established by most religions are real similar. So, do we need it? Well, like I say, I hope we don't, because, we're losing it. And I don't think it's coming back. I could be wrong about that. There is a general decline, and I don't think it's coming back, but it might. I might be really surprised by that. There may be a real uptick in religious fervor. I don't think that would be a bad thing, if there were. But unfortunately, religion is one of those areas, like with politics, we're generating more personality cults. And religion is in a catch-22. I mean, it should never change. Everything, should be, and yet you've got a society that is changing. And there have been some responses that, you asked before about the LBGTQ, whatever that is, one of those areas where, religion is responding and isn't responding. And, how do they thread that? I don't know. I'm not running one of those religious doctrines, but there are lots of those kinds of questions, abortion questions, and others that at one point a religion was very staid in its execution, and then now different. They have one of their big conventions and decide, yeah, well, the Lord has changed his mind now, and now it's okay for, whatever. They declare it. Catholics have it a little bit easier. The Pope can declare it, so that's a good thing.
What do you think about the role of art in society? Should there be limits on what comedians can joke about, such as depictions of sex or violence? And is there a time, such as when someone who jokes about the Holocaust should be checked?
Well, I guess, this refers to, the control of people that we talked about earlier. No. I mean, comedians, they're frequently offensive. And, should you have ratings? Well, maybe you should have ratings so that, children don't see offensive material, but that's not limited to comedians. I mean, that's everyone. And the real question is, if you start checking comedians, or anybody for that matter, the real question is, who gets to do that? And, is that going to change? I mean, you're going to have people checking comedians and deciding. We used to have these really sophisticated terms for television, and I've forgotten what they called that group, but they decided, what were the limits in television back in the 60s and the 70s. Like married people couldn't sleep in the same bed. They had to have twin beds. And, and if they did lay down on a bed, they had to have one foot on the floor while, they could put the other foot up on the bed. So all of these little regulations about who decides that? I mean, who gets to decide that? No, I mean, what would be on the list other than, the Holocaust? You can't joke about the Holocaust. I mean, if you can joke about, so many horrible things, which comedians do, why should the Holocaust be off limits? At some point, it's going to be, at some point you can get so excessive that you lose your audience, and every comedian knows that. So, losing an audience is not something you want to do. In a way, comedians are frequently offensive, and that's okay. If you're offended, well, then he's not your comedian anymore. You move on to some other funny guy.
What do you think about mass shootings? Was this a concern in the era when you and your friends were bringing 22s on the bus? And if not, what do you think's changed between then and now?
I really wish I knew about that. I think, what's changed, obviously, is mental state. I mean, I think that's sad. I was talking to somebody, can't remember if we talked about this, but when I was at MBA, when I was in school, every kid had a pocket knife. We all had just a small pocket knife. I today carry a small pocket knife. It's useful. It's a useful tool. And I remember teachers, getting some cardboard box or something, and she'd say, one of you boys give me your knife, and I need to open this box. We all carried knives, and they weren't for sticking people with, and I never heard of anybody getting stuck with a knife. They were tools and useful ones at that. And we never, even though we were, I guess in middle school, we never thought about shooting each other with a gun. That never entered our minds. Maybe we weren't as careful as we should have been, but we never thought about that. And so I think there is something about the mental state, and the truth is that we now don't trust the mental state of even sixth graders. We just don't trust their mental state, so they can't have a knife. They can't have a knife. We never. I don't know if there was a rule against taking a gun to school. Probably. I would think you couldn't bring a gun to school, but I know they have rifles down in the riflery range down at MBA, but that was just not a concern when we were kids. And there might have been some kind of a shooting at some school at some point in the 60s or 70s. I don't remember it if there was. But yeah, it's much more common now, and it is, and I think it just speaks to this whole mental state. We just didn't have. It just didn't exist, this craziness. Partially emotional, I guess, but just a mental state that just doesn't exist anymore. Maybe we were just more level-headed than, less extreme than today.
So along those same lines, what concerns do you have for the future, both locally and globally? Do you have anything that makes you worry for Adeline, Charlie, and Cammie?
Yeah, my main concern is that we are not adapting quickly enough, that we are not, that the earth is not adapting. We humans are not adapting quickly enough for the demands of the earth, and I think that's a genuine concern. In terms of, I have a lot of faith in humanity. I really do. Like I say, this is a very peaceful time. Yeah, I know we've got Ukraine and Russia and all kinds of stuff going on in Latin America and in Africa. I understand we've got conflict, but on a global scale, this is a very peaceful time, and I have confidence in people. I really do. I do worry about what's going on with our climate and what's going on with planet Earth. And I do think it's important that we become this interplanetary species.
So how did your parents guide your future? Was there any pressure to go to college or toward a certain career
they were pretty hands off when it comes to. I think my dad would have been delighted if I'd become a doctor. I think he would have, but no, they didn't enforce anything like that. This is interesting, and I've talked to my kids this way, and I think they talk to their kids this way. I went to a prep school, in a prep school, prep for college, preparatory school for college. So they talked to me in terms of, well, when you're in college, you'll be able to do this, or, once you graduate from college. So it was almost assumed, maybe it was brainwashed, but anyway, it was almost assumed. And of course, everybody I went to school with, because it was a prep school, everybody went to college. So, it was kind of assumed that was the next step after high school was college. So, they certainly enforced that. But no, they didn't tell me what I had to do. Fortunately, they had the money to be able to send me to college, and ultimately to graduate school as well, which was great.
So, as a parent and grandparent yourself, how do you balance unconditional love with tough love? Is it different reaching across a generation to your grandkids than dealing directly with your own kids?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You're looking for, in terms of raising your own kids, you're looking for, whether boy or girl, a strong, independent, intelligent kid. And you want to do what needs to be done to make them strong and independent and intelligent, so that they can evaluate and make decisions that make sense. And so that's your goal. With grandkids, I've already told my grandkids I will never say no. So, you want ice cream for breakfast? Yes, you can have it. I will never say no to anything. And so, and they know that, they'll tell you that, because it's not my job. They have parents. Their parents are going to have to put the brakes on whatever has to be put on. It's their responsibility to create these strong, independent creatures. And it's my job just to indulge them in any way that I can. So that, yes, being a grandparent is very different from being a parent. It is all of the love and none of the responsibility. So I like that. Yes.
And how do you feel about the speed of development for kids nowadays? They're using computers, iPads, technology sooner than ever. Do you think there needs to be any age limits instituted? Like we have 16 to drive, 18 to join the military, 21 to drink.
Age limits for what?
Using technology. I mean, just being able to, if you could Google search and see a lot of violence or sex or any of these things at the tip of your fingers,
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, that's going to be the purview of the parents to monitor that, control that, and that's not like driving or drinking. There's no social umbrella to be. This is individual stuff, and individual parents making individual decisions about their individual kids. And many parents will say, Charlie, for example, She uses her computer, and there are limits already placed on it, her search results and all that kind of stuff. But she can only use it in the kitchen. You can't take it up to her room and use it. So this is, parents are doing this, and they're doing it already. I don't see any reason to have the government involved in that. No.
And in that same vein, how do you feel about courting in the modern age and social media? How did you pursue women, and how is it being a father to two girls, and how do you feel about dating for your granddaughters in the modern age?
Well, obviously it's very different now, it really is. And fortunately, I don't have to manipulate that. I was lucky, when I went to college, we had this captive universe of women who were in college with me. So, I got to see them and talk to them and date them, and, that was great. And fortunately for me, I found one of them that I wound up marrying. So I never was in the dating scene after college. I don't know what that would have been like. I don't know what that would have been like. It does seem to me like internet dating makes sense, that it could be something useful and, more likely to meet the right person. Once again, it's just happenstance. I mean, things just, you never know when it's gonna happen, you just never know. Sarah met Scott just outside of a bar, and they were passing, just a few minutes longer in the men's room, or a little change, and they would have never met. Yeah, kind of happenstance.
Did you have any mentors or guides throughout your life, such as your father, through key times that you leaned on? And have you been a mentor, and how do you feel about that role and its importance?
Yeah, certainly my dad, was a mentor to me, but also other people that I worked for were mentors to me. Really appreciated that. And I did mentor others. I would like to know at some point, I would love to know, because I will tell stories about, former bosses, what they said or what they did, and, how I've used that. I've often wondered if any of the guys that I worked with, or guys that reported to me or whatever, tell stories like that about me. I don't know. I don't know. But that would be interesting to know. But yeah, frequently somebody will come up with the right phrase at the right time, and you're like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah. That really changes the way I think about this thing. Some of them I've used for the rest of my career, rest of my life. I had a boss actually at Arby's who told me, first-rate people hire first-rate people. Second-rate people hire third-rate people. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. I've seen that so often, First-rate people hire first-rate people, and second-rate people, they don't want to be threatened. They hire third-rate people. And that's true. I've seen it repeatedly. So I don't know if he would even know how that little phrase affected me. In my subsequent life.
So how has friendship changed throughout the course of your life? Are there any secrets to maintaining friendships, or will geography and circumstance dictate what lasts and what doesn't?
Yeah. Of course, the biggest thing that's changed in that regard for me is the internet, and you're able to connect with people that you would have otherwise lost contact with. So I have had a few friends that I've reconnected with over the internet, and that's been great. I think the truth is, when you're young, you have people who are your peers, and you think because they're your peers, you think they're your friends. Just because you have so much in common, you're the same age, you're going through the same things, and I remember being in school and thinking I had like 30 friends or 40 friends, or, I was in a fraternity, hell, I thought everybody was my friend. And then over time, they kind of thin out, you have fewer and fewer people who are in exactly the same state or the same stage in life, or whatever as you. You wind up with fewer friends. I think when you become older, and I don't know, I guess it depends on the environment that you're in. I guess if you're in a retirement home or something, maybe you got a bunch of people who are your age and all that, and you consider them your friends. But I think the older you get, generally, you can count your friends on one hand. I mean, you don't have that many. You really don't. And sometimes, you mistake work relationships for friendships. And that's not true either. So, you just don't realize how little you really have in friendship common with some people. But yeah, I think there's some stuff. Scott and Sarah, just as a couple, they have a lot of friends. And I'm not really sure, how much they're their friends and how much they aren't. I remember my parents always seemed to have a lot of friends, bridge groups and all kinds of things. At least for myself, I think, and for most of the people that I know, yeah, I think if you've got a handful of friends, you're really lucky.